The grand stage of European history often saw the mighty Habsburg dynasty standing at its very center. For centuries, they built an empire that stretched across continents, relying on a complex web of alliances, treaties, and trusted relationships. They were the Holy Roman Emperors, the kings of Bohemia and Hungary, the rulers of vast territories. Yet even the most powerful empires could be blindsided, and the Habsburgs, despite their strength, experienced moments of profound betrayal that echoed through the halls of power, leaving them reeling. These were not just shifts in political winds. These were calculated moves by those they thought they could count on, dramatic turns that changed the course of wars and the fate of nations. Here are 7 of the most shocking times. Habsburg allies turned their backs, leaving a trail of broken trust and historical upheaval. Number 1. Ferenc Rákóczi, I of Hungary. The early years of the 18th century found the Habsburgs deeply engrossed in a monumental struggle. The War of the Spanish Succession demanded their full attention, drawing armies and resources westward to the battlefields of Bavaria and the Low Countries, far from their traditional heartlands. Emperor Leopold I, and later his son Joseph I, faced the daunting task of securing the Spanish inheritance for their dynasty while battling the formidable power of Bourbon France. It was a time when every ally counted. Every resource was precious, and internal stability was paramount. Yet deep within their own realm, in the turbulent kingdom of Hungary, a different kind of storm was brewing. Hungary, a diverse and proud land, had been under Habsburg rule for generations, but it was never a truly subdued possession. Its powerful magnates guarded their ancient liberties fiercely, and the Protestant population often felt the heavy hand of Catholic Habsburg rule. Decades of simmering resentment, fueled by a desire for greater autonomy and religious freedom, lay just beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to ignite. Into this powder keg stepped Ferenc Rákóczi, born into one of Hungary's most illustrious and historically rebellious families. Rákóczi was a figure of immense prestige and potential. His ancestors had led previous uprisings against Habsburg authority. Though initially educated in Habsburg circles, Rákóczi harbored a deep-seated conviction that Hungarian rights were being systematically eroded. He believed the Habsburgs had overstepped their bounds, imposing centralized rule and suppressing the Protestant faith in ways that violated ancient Hungarian laws and customs. He watched the unfolding War of the Spanish Succession with a keen eye, understanding that the Habsburgs' distraction presented a unique window of opportunity. While imperial armies marched west to face Louis XIV, the Hungarian garrisons were thin, and the emperor's attention was divided. Rákóczi began to explore a dangerous and audacious path. He started secret communications with the very enemy of his emperor, Louis XIV of France. For the Sun King, a rebellion in the Habsburg heartland was a gift from the heavens. It would draw vital Habsburg troops away from the Western Front, relieve pressure on his own armies, and further destabilize his arch-rival. France began to offer financial support and promises of military aid to the Hungarian cause. Rákóczi, for his part, presented his movement not merely as a local uprising, but as a legitimate war for Hungarian independence, a struggle for constitutional freedom against a tyrannical overlord. From the Habsburg perspective, however, this was nothing short of treason. Rákóczi, a powerful subject of their crown, was conspiring with their greatest enemy. To tear apart their own kingdom, the ultimate act of betrayal arrived in 1703. Rákóczi, armed with French promises and the widespread support of Hungarian peasants and many nobles, issued a manifesto, the Proclamation of Brezin. He called upon all Hungarians to rise up against Habsburg tyranny and fight for the ancient liberties of their homeland. With this call to arms, the War of Rákóczi's independence erupted. It was a widespread and violent uprising that swept across much of Hungary, catching the Habsburg government completely off guard. The shock in Vienna was immense. Here, they were battling for the very future of Europe against the dominant power of France. and suddenly a massive rebellion had flared up in their own backyard. This was not a minor border skirmish. It was a full-scale conflict that required substantial military commitment. Habsburg commanders, already stretched thin, now faced the unenviable task of diverting precious regiments, often veterans of Western campaigns, to quell the Hungarian insurgents. The rebellion tied down tens of thousands of Habsburg troops for 8 long years. Fortresses were besieged, battles were fought, and the Hungarian countryside was devastated. Rákóczi's forces, though often lacking in professional training and equipment compared to the imperial army, were driven by fierce determination and a deep knowledge of their homeland. They proved to be a persistent and costly adversary. The sheer scale and duration of the uprising, combined with its direct connection to the French enemy, represented a profound betrayal of fealty. The Habsburgs were forced to make difficult choices. They could not abandon the war in the West, yet they could not allow Hungary to break away. The betrayal forced them into a two-front war, draining their coffers, straining their diplomatic efforts, and adding an immense burden to an already challenging global conflict. The very idea that a powerful noble, owing theoretical allegiance, would align with the dynasty's mortal enemy to carve out a separate state was a bitter pill to swallow. The war eventually concluded with the Peace of Szatmár in 1711, granting some concessions to Hungarian liberties, but ultimately reaffirming Habsburg rule. Rákóczi himself chose exile, refusing to acknowledge Habsburg sovereignty, his life a testament to a betrayal born of deep-seated grievances and opportunistic ambition. His actions left an indelible mark on Habsburg history, a stark reminder that threats could arise not just from foreign rivals, but from within the very heart of their dominion. Number 2. Frederick the Great of Prussia. The year 1740 was a moment of profound change and uncertainty for the Habsburg dynasty. Emperor Charles VI had just passed away, leaving no male heir. For years, he had dedicated himself to securing the Pragmatic Sanction, a legal instrument designed to ensure that his daughter, Maria Theresa, would inherit all the Habsburg lands intact. Most of Europe's major powers, including the growing Kingdom of Prussia, had formally recognized this agreement, seemingly guaranteeing Maria Theresa a smooth succession. Maria Theresa was just 23 years old when the weight of an empire fell upon her shoulders. She was a young woman untested in the intricate dance of European politics and warfare. She faced a vast and diverse inheritance, a collection of kingdoms, duchies, and territories held together by the personal bond to the Habsburg crown. Many rivals viewed her ascension as an opportunity, a chance to chip away at the Habsburg power or challenge the legitimacy of a female ruler in a male-dominated world. Among those who had formally recognized the Pragmatic Sanction was Frederick II, the King of Prussia. He had only ascended his own throne a few months before Maria Theresa. Prussia was a relatively new kingdom, but under Frederick's father it had built a formidable army and accumulated a substantial treasury. Frederick II, soon to be known as Frederick the Great, was a man of immense intellect, cynical ambition, and cold calculation. He saw the Habsburg succession crisis not as a moment for loyalty, but as a golden opportunity to dramatically expand. Prussian power, Silesia, was the target. This rich, fertile province, part of the Habsburg lands, bordered Prussia and held significant strategic and economic value. Frederick claimed ancient, flimsy dynastic rights to parts of Silesia, but his true motivation was clear: to seize the province while Maria Theresa was at her weakest, too vulnerable to resist effectively. His father had agreed to the Pragmatic Sanction, theoretically committing Prussia to upholding Maria Theresa's inheritance. Frederick, however, viewed such agreements as mere scraps of paper when they stood in the way of national interest and personal glory. The ultimate act of betrayal came with breathtaking speed and audacity. In December 1740, just weeks after Charles VI's death, Frederick launched his army into Silesia. There was no declaration of war, no formal warning, no attempt at diplomatic negotiation. The invasion was a lightning strike, a move designed to present Maria Theresa with a fait accompli before she could even consolidate her power or rally her allies. Prussian troops poured into the unprepared province, quickly overrunning its small garrisons. The shock that reverberated through Vienna and across Europe was profound. Maria Theresa, still grieving her father and grappling with the complexities of her new role, was utterly blindsided. She had assumed, given the prior agreements, that she would at least have time to settle into her reign. Instead, she found herself plunged into a brutal war. Her authority immediately challenged by a neighbor who was supposedly bound by treaty. The sheer audacity of Frederick's move, attacking a young female ruler at her most vulnerable, was seen by many as a grave breach of international conduct and a cynical abandonment of all pretense of loyalty or decency. Frederick's betrayal shattered the fragile peace of Europe and ignited the War of the Austrian Succession. His invasion encouraged other European powers, who also harbored claims or ambitions to challenge Maria Theresa's inheritance. France, Bavaria, and Saxony soon joined the fray, sensing an opportunity to dismantle the Habsburg monarchy. Maria Theresa found herself fighting for the very survival of her dynasty on multiple fronts, facing a coalition of enemies almost from the moment she inherited her crown. The betrayal by Frederick the Great was not merely a military maneuver. It was a fundamental shift in the European power balance. It elevated Prussia from a rising power to a major player, a direct rival to the Habsburgs. For dominance in German affairs, it initiated a bitter century-long rivalry between Prussia and Austria that would define Central European politics. For Maria Theresa, it was a baptism of fire, forcing her to display an extraordinary level of courage, determination, and political skill to save her empire. Frederick's calculated treachery in 1740 stands as a stark example of how ambition, when unchecked, can utterly disregard prior commitments and shatter the bonds of trust with devastating consequence. Number 3. Great Britain and the Dutch Republic. The early years of the 18th century witnessed Europe plunged into the massive and costly conflict known as the War of the Spanish Succession. At its heart was the question of who would inherit the vast Spanish Empire after the death of the childless King Charles II of Spain. Both the Bourbon dynasty of France and the Habsburg dynasty of Austria laid claim, threatening to upset the delicate balance of power across the continent. To prevent France, already the dominant power under Louis XIV, from also controlling Spain and its immense overseas possessions, a formidable coalition was formed. This grand alliance included the Habsburgs, Great Britain, and the Dutch Republic, united by a common fear of French hegemony. For over a decade, these allies fought side by side, their armies achieving legendary victories on battlefields like Blenheim, Ramillies, Oudenarde, and Malplaquet. The British commander John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough, and the Habsburg general, Prince Eugene of Savoy, formed a brilliant military partnership, often coordinating their forces to inflict crushing defeats. The alliance seemed unbreakable. Forged in the heat of battle and bound by shared strategic goals, their stated aim was to place the Habsburg claimant, Archduke Charles, who would later become Emperor Charles VI, on the Spanish throne. They had sacrificed immense resources and countless lives to achieve this shared objective. However, the tide of alliance began to turn not on the battlefield but in the intricate world of politics and dynastic change. The war had been immensely costly, both in lives and treasure. In Great Britain, a political shift occurred. The Whig Party, which largely supported continuing the war, lost influence, and the Tory Party, advocating for peace, gained power. War weariness had set in amongst the British population, and the heavy taxes needed to fund the campaigns were becoming increasingly unpopular. Then a sudden, unexpected event dramatically altered the strategic landscape. In 1711, Emperor Joseph I, Archduke Charles's elder brother, died without a male heir. This meant that Archduke Charles, the very person the Grand Alliance was fighting to place on the Spanish throne, now became the sole male heir to all the vast Habsburg hereditary lands in Austria, Bohemia, and Hungary, as well as the Holy Roman Emperor. This turn of events presented a new, alarming prospect for Great Britain and the Dutch Republic. While they had previously feared a vast Bourbon Empire, they now faced the equally daunting possibility of an immense Habsburg Empire, with the same individual ruling both Spain and Austria. This would create a dominion stretching from Vienna to Madrid, from the Low Countries to the Americas. A power concentration that would be just as threatening to the European balance as a united Bourbon kingdom. From London and The Hague, it looked like they had simply swapped one potential hegemon for another. The ultimate act of betrayal involved secret negotiations. Without consulting their Habsburg ally, Great Britain and the Dutch Republic began clandestine talks with France. They sought a separate peace, one that would end the expensive war and prevent the emergence of an overpowering Habsburg state. These talks culminated in the signing of the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713. Under this treaty, Great Britain and the Dutch Republic agreed to recognize Philip V, the Bourbon claimant, as King of Spain, albeit with the condition that the crowns of Spain and France would never be united. They secured significant territorial and commercial advantages for themselves, but they effectively abandoned the Habsburg goal of placing Charles VI on the Spanish throne. The shock in Vienna was palpable. After years of fighting as loyal allies, enduring immense losses, and dedicating every resource to the common cause, the Habsburgs felt utterly betrayed. They had relied on their partners to see the war through, to its stated conclusion, which meant a Habsburg Spain. Instead, their allies had unilaterally decided to make peace, leaving them to either accept a greatly diminished outcome or continue the fight alone. It was a crushing blow to their trust and a profound blow to their dynastic aspirations. Charles VI, now emperor, initially refused to accept the terms of Utrecht, seeing them as a betrayal of their alliance and a deep affront to his honor and the Habsburg dynasty. He continued, "The war against France alone for a short period, a desperate and ultimately futile endeavor." He was eventually forced to negotiate his own peace, the Treaty of Rastatt in 1714, which largely confirmed the terms set at Utrecht, but did secure for him significant territories in the Spanish Netherlands and Italy. The betrayal by Great Britain and the Dutch Republic at Utrecht left a lasting scar on Habsburg diplomatic relations. It demonstrated that even the closest alliances could fracture when perceived national interests shifted, and that mutual sacrifice did not always guarantee mutual loyalty to the very end. Number 4. Maximilian II Emanuel, Elector of Bavaria. The final years of the 17th century and the dawn of the 18th were a time of intense power struggles in Europe, culminating in the monumental War of the Spanish Succession. The Habsburg dynasty, at the peak of its continental power, was preparing for the fight of its life against the ambitious King Louis XIV of France. In this looming conflict, the German states of the Holy Roman Empire were crucial players, their allegiances often swaying the balance of power. Among these, the Electorate of Bavaria held a particularly vital strategic position. Nestled between Habsburg Austria and various German states, Bavaria was a powerful, wealthy, and militarily capable realm. Its ruler, Maximilian II Emanuel, was a fascinating and complex figure. Maximilian Emanuel was not a stranger to Habsburg service. He had married an Austrian archduchess, Maria Antonia, the daughter of Emperor Leopold, the first forging a direct dynastic link to the Habsburgs. He had even fought alongside the brilliant Habsburg general Prince Eugene of Savoy against the Ottoman Turks, distinguishing himself in battle and earning a reputation as a capable military commander. For a time he seemed a natural ally, bound by family ties and shared imperial interests. He was a prince of the Holy Roman Empire, technically under the emperor's suzerainty, and his loyalties were expected to lie with the Habsburg emperor in Vienna. Yet, beneath this facade of alliance and kinship, Maximilian Emanuel harbored immense personal ambition. He was a man driven by a desire for greater power, prestige, and territory for his Wittelsbach dynasty. He dreamt of expanding Bavaria's influence, perhaps even securing a royal crown, or most audaciously vying for the imperial throne itself. As the Spanish succession crisis loomed, with the childless King Charles II of Spain nearing his end. Maximilian Emmanuel saw an unparalleled opportunity to achieve his grandiose aims. He had a distant claim to the Spanish throne through his deceased wife, though a weak one, and he eyed the Spanish Netherlands as a potential prize. His gaze, however, turned not towards his Habsburg relatives, but towards their greatest enemy, Louis XIV of France. The French king, a master of subtle diplomacy and strategic manipulation, was keen to draw Bavaria into his orbit. A Bavarian alliance with France would open a critical second front for the Habsburgs, right on their doorstep, threatening Vienna itself and forcing them to divert vital resources from the main theaters of war. Louis XIV offered Maximilian Emmanuel enticing promises of territorial gains and recognition, playing directly into the elector's vaulting ambition. The ultimate act of betrayal came in 1702. Maximilian Emmanuel, despite his dynastic ties to the Habsburgs and his previous military cooperation, threw his lot in with France. He publicly renounced his allegiance to the Holy Roman Emperor and allied with Louis XIV. Bavarian forces, once fighting alongside the Habsburgs against the Turks, now stood shoulder to shoulder with the French, preparing to march on Vienna. It was a massive strategic gamble, a complete reversal of his previous stance, and a devastating blow to the Habsburg war effort. The shock in Vienna was immense. The Habsburgs had anticipated a grand struggle against France, but they had assumed Bavaria would remain neutral, or at the very least, loyal within the imperial system. Instead, a powerful German prince, closely related by marriage, and with whom they had shared military victories, had turned against them and opened a direct route for French armies into the heart of their hereditary lands. The betrayal was deeply personal for Emperor Leopold I, who had seen his son-in-law switch sides so brazenly. Maximilian Emmanuel's decision had immediate and catastrophic consequences for the Habsburgs. It forced them to fight a brutal and costly two-front war. Bavarian and French forces pushed deep into Swabia and threatened Tyrol, a vital passage into Italy. Vienna itself seemed vulnerable. The betrayal drew Habsburg forces away from other crucial fronts, particularly in Italy and the Rhine, where they were already engaged against French armies. The year 1703 was particularly perilous for the Habsburgs, as the Franco-Bavarian alliance advanced dangerously close to the Austrian capital. The situation was only saved by the brilliant generalship of Prince Eugene of Savoy and the Duke of Marlborough, who orchestrated a daring march into Bavaria and inflicted a decisive defeat on the Franco-Bavarian forces at the Battle of Blenheim. Maximilian Emmanuel was forced into exile, and Bavaria was occupied by Habsburg forces. His betrayal, born of boundless ambition, ultimately ended in disaster for him, but it served as a painful reminder to the Habsburgs of the fragility of even their closest alliances when confronted by the allure of power. Number 5. George I Rákóczi of Transylvania. The mid-17th century was a period of relentless conflict for the Habsburgs. The 30 Years' War, a cataclysmic struggle that ravaged Central Europe, demanded their complete attention and stretched their resources to the breaking point. While battling Protestant princes in the Holy Roman Empire and facing the formidable armies of Sweden and France, the Habsburgs also had to contend with the complex and often treacherous politics of their eastern frontier. Transylvania was a semi-independent state, a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, but its princes frequently played a delicate balancing act between the mighty Ottomans and the neighboring Habsburgs. George I Rákóczi, Prince of Transylvania, was a ruler of considerable ambition and cunning. He navigated the treacherous Byeline landscape with a calculating mind, always seeking to advance his own power and that of Transylvania. While he owed nominal allegiance to the Ottoman Sultan, he was also keenly aware of the Habsburg presence and often entered into agreements with them when it served his immediate interests, or when he needed to deflect Ottoman pressure. At times, these agreements could appear to be alliances, promising peace, or even cooperation against common foes. However, Rákóczi's true loyalty lay with himself and the expansion of his own domain. He viewed the Habsburgs' preoccupation with the 30 Years' War as a golden opportunity. He could exploit their weakness, expand his influence into Royal Hungary, the part under Habsburg rule, and champion the cause of Hungarian Protestantism, which often found itself at odds with the staunchly Catholic Habsburg dynasty. He saw himself as a potential unifier of Hungary, and the Habsburgs, despite their imperial claims, stood in his way. The ultimate acts of betrayal by Rákóczi were not singular events, but a series of calculated invasions and broken promises that repeatedly destabilized the Habsburg eastern flank. In 1644, for example, despite previous agreements and a supposed period of peace, Rákóczi launched a large-scale invasion of Royal Hungary. He allied himself with Sweden and France. The Habsburgs, most persistent enemies in the 30 Years' War. His stated aim was to defend Protestant liberties in Hungary, but his actions clearly served his own territorial and political ambitions. The shock in Vienna was a familiar one by this point in the war, but no less frustrating. Just when they needed every soldier and every resource to fight for their survival in the Holy Roman Empire, a powerful prince on their eastern border, with whom they had previously negotiated truces, had unleashed an army into their territory. This forced the Habsburgs to divert precious veteran regiments from the main war fronts to deal with the threat in Hungary. This constant need to fight on multiple fronts was a drain on their treasury and their military might. Rákóczi's campaigns were not always decisive, but they were consistently disruptive. He would negotiate peace treaties, such as the Peace of Linz in 1645, which granted some concessions to Hungarian Protestants, only to resume hostilities or threaten renewed invasions. When he saw a fresh opportunity, his strategy was to constantly leverage the Habsburgs' difficulties in the West, using his position as a potential ally or a potential threat to extract concessions or gain territory. His repeated shifts in allegiance and his willingness to side with foreign powers against the emperor represented a profound betrayal of any semblance of imperial fealty or even good neighborly conduct. The Habsburgs were caught in a frustrating cycle. They needed to defend their Hungarian territories, but every engagement with Rákóczi was a distraction from their larger European war. He was a persistent thorn in their side, always ready to exploit their vulnerabilities. The constant need to defend against Rákóczi, and later his son George II Rákóczi, significantly complicated Habsburg strategy. Throughout the latter half of the 30 Years' War and beyond, it meant they could never fully commit their resources to the West without worrying about a fresh incursion from Transylvania. George I Rákóczi's career served as a bitter lesson for the Habsburgs. Even a ruler under the shadow of the Ottoman Empire could pose a significant internal challenge, particularly when external enemies provided both encouragement and material iniminous terror. His betrayals were a testament to the fluid and opportunistic nature of alliances in a war-torn continent, and the enduring challenge of maintaining stability within a sprawling, multi-ethnic empire. Number 6. Frederick V of the Palatinate. The early 17th century simmered with religious and political tension across the Holy Roman Empire. The Habsburgs held the imperial crown, and their authority, though vast, was constantly challenged by the powerful princes of the empire, especially the Protestant ones. Bohemia, a key kingdom within the Habsburg dominion, was a powder keg. Its estates, largely Protestant, resented Habsburg attempts to impose centralized Catholic rule, particularly under the devout Ferdinand, who would soon become Emperor Ferdinand II. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. Frederick V, the Elector Palatine, was a prominent figure among the Protestant princes. He was a Calvinist, a leader of the Protestant Union, a defensive alliance of Protestant states within the empire. He was also a man of considerable dynastic ambition, enhanced by his marriage to Elizabeth Stuart, daughter of King James I of England. As an elector, Frederick was one of the 7 princes responsible for electing the Holy Roman Emperor, and he was theoretically bound by the imperial constitution, expected to uphold the peace and stability of the empire. However, the deep-seated religious and political grievances in Bohemia, coupled with Frederick's own ambitions, created a volatile situation. In May 1618, a dramatic act of defiance occurred in Prague. Two Habsburg imperial governors were thrown from a window of Prague Castle by angry Protestant Bohemian nobles. This defenestration of Prague sparked the Bohemian Revolt, a direct challenge to Habsburg authority. The Bohemian estates, having deposed Ferdinand as their king, then sought a new ruler, one who would champion their Protestant faith and their ancient liberties against Habsburg encroachment. Their choice in August 1619 fell upon Frederick V. They offered him the Bohemian crown. This was a monumental decision both for Frederick and for the future of Europe. For Frederick, it represented a chance to elevate his status, to become a king and to lead the Protestant cause within the empire. For the Habsburgs, it was an unforgivable act of betrayal. Bohemia was a hereditary Habsburg kingdom. For an elector, a prince of the empire, to accept a crown seized from his emperor's ancestral lands was an act of open rebellion, a direct declaration of imperial authority. The ultimate act of betrayal was Frederick's acceptance of the Bohemian crown in November 1619. He knew the implication. His advisors, even his father-in-law, King James, had warned him against it, understanding that it would ignite a full-scale war. Yet, fueled by religious zeal, personal ambition, and the encouragement of some radical Calvinist ministers, Frederick rode into Prague and was crowned King of Bohemia. The shock in Vienna was immediate and profound. Ferdinand II, who had just been elected Holy Roman Emperor, considered Frederick's actions an intolerable affront, an act of high treason against his person and the imperial system. The peaceful resolution of religious differences, already fragile, now seemed impossible. This was not a minor disagreement. It was a usurpation of a hereditary kingdom by one of the emperor's most powerful subjects. Frederick's betrayal directly ignited the 30 Years' War, one of the most destructive conflicts in European history. Ferdinand II, with the support of the Catholic League and Spain, moved swiftly and decisively to crush the Bohemian Rebellion. The ensuing conflict drew in virtually every major European power, leading to decades of bloodshed, famine, and disease that devastated vast swaths of Germany and Central Europe. Frederick's reign as King of Bohemia lasted barely a year, earning him the moniker, the Winter King. His forces were decisively defeated by the Imperial and Catholic League armies. At the Battle of White Mountain, outside Prague, in November 1620, Frederick and Elizabeth were forced to flee into exile, losing not only Bohemia but also their hereditary lands in the Palatinate. Their betrayal of imperial authority, however, had already lit the fuse for a war that would redefine Europe, fundamentally reshaping the balance of power and leaving an enduring legacy of religious division and political upheaval. The shock of an elector daring to seize a Habsburg crown echoed for generations, a symbol of the dangerous ambitions that could unravel the very fabric of the Holy Roman Empire. Number 7. Maurice of Saxony. The mid-16th century was a period of intense religious upheaval and political maneuvering within the Holy Roman Empire. Emperor Charles V, a devout Catholic and the most powerful monarch in Europe, sought to bring order to his vast and fragmented domains. He had just achieved a monumental victory at the Battle of Mühlberg in 1547, crushing the Schmalkaldic League, an alliance of Protestant princes who had defied his authority. At his side during this crucial conflict was Maurice of Saxony, a cunning and ambitious Protestant prince, who had controversially sided with the Catholic emperor against his own Protestant brethren, even against his cousin John Frederick I, the rightful elector of Saxony. Maurice's decision to ally with Charles V had been a calculated gamble. In exchange for his crucial support, Charles V had rewarded Maurice handsomely. Maurice was granted the electoral dignity, a highly coveted position among the German princes, elevating him to one of the most powerful figures in the empire. He also gained substantial territories from his defeated cousin. For a time, Maurice appeared to be a loyal, if opportunistic ally, benefiting immensely from Charles V's favor and seemingly committed to his imperial agenda. However, beneath the surface, Maurice harbored deep resentments and growing concerns. Charles V, after his victory over the Schmalkaldic League, seemed intent on consolidating his power, not just politically, but also religiously. He imposed the Augsburg Interim, a decree that sought to re-establish Catholic practices in Protestant areas, even if temporarily. Many German princes, including Maurice, feared that Charles V was moving towards absolutism, threatening their traditional liberties and autonomy within the empire. Maurice, despite his previous actions, was a Protestant at heart, and the emperor's religious policies began to chafe. He started to feel that he had merely helped Charles V to become too powerful, potentially enslaving all the German princes, Catholic and Protestant alike. Secretly, Maurice began to conspire. He reached out to other dissatisfied princes, forging a new alliance designed to curb the emperor's power. Crucially, he also entered into a secret alliance with King Henry II of France, Charles V's long-standing enemy. This was the ultimate act of betrayal. A prince, elevated and enriched by the emperor, now making common cause with the emperor's most formidable foreign adversary, with the express aim of undermining his authority and even capturing him. The ultimate act of betrayal came with stunning speed and secrecy in 1552. Maurice, ostensibly still loyal to Charles V, launched a lightning military campaign. He moved his army with such swiftness and stealth that Charles V, then residing in Innsbruck, was completely caught by surprise. The emperor, weakened by gout and overconfident in Maurice's loyalty, had only a small personal guard. Maurice's goal was nothing less than to capture the emperor himself. The shock was immense. Charles V, the most powerful man in Europe, the monarch who ruled an empire upon which the sun never set, found himself in grave personal danger, betrayed by a man he had trusted and elevated. He had to flee Innsbruck in the dead of night, carried in a litter over the snowy Brenner Pass, narrowly escaping capture by Maurice's forces. It was a humiliating and dangerous flight for the mighty emperor. Maurice's sudden uprising, often called the Prince's Rebellion, forced Charles V to concede significant ground. His authority was severely challenged, and his dreams of uniting the empire under a single strong Catholic rule were shattered. The betrayal led to the Treaty of Passau in 1552, and ultimately the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, which formally recognized the division of Christendom within the Holy Roman Empire and significant curtail. It exposed the fragility of Charles V's imperial ambitions and demonstrated how quickly a trusted ally motivated by shifting loyalties and personal ambition could become a mortal foe. The shock of the emperor's narrow escape and the subsequent concessions he was forced to make left an indelible mark on his reign and on the future of the Holy Roman Empire. It proved that even boundless power could be humbled by a cunning and unexpected act of treachery from within.